Discuss this. Maria Caulfield, a Conservative MP for Lewis and a former nurse. And here in the PM studio is Frank Dobson, who was Labour's Health Secretary under Tony Blair. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Maria Caulfield, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, it sounds great, doesn't it? The extra money for the NHS, but actually, what is it actually achieving? There is extra money, as Norman Lamb said. £10 billion a year is going into the NHS alone. That's going to pay for 800,000 more operations. There's £2 billion for new drugs. So there is extra money, and the money that the NHS asked for, that wasn't £10 billion wasn't a figure dreamt up by the government. It was something Simon Stevens and NHS England actually asked for. And there is also extra money going into social care, which has been the Cinderella service of the care service for decades now. And there's £7.6 billion of extra money going into social care that is ring-fenced for social care for local authorities.
So there is. Are these not pennies being thrown into a pot that needs pounds and notes, though?
Well, no, and, my argument as a nurse and something I saw during my 20 years in the NHS it's not how much you spend on the NHS, it's what you do with that. And we've got a classic example in my constituency in Lewis, where we don't have a hospital of our own. We're dependent on surrounding hospitals, and in the Royal Sussex County in Brighton, it's in special measures at the moment, and yet a hospital 5 miles down the coast in Worthing serves a similar population, gets the same funding, and is rated as outstanding.
Okay.
So it's not just about what you spend, it's what you do with that money that's important as well.
Let's bring in Frank Dobson, picking up on that point from Maria Caulfield about how money is spent, but then I guess also from the perspective of the voter. Is it a vote-winning idea to say, put your cross next to my name on the ballot box and I'll hike up your tax bill?
Well, we can't be sure, but I think it would be. I can remember, when I was Health Secretary, I managed to negotiate £18 billion for over a 3-year period, and then I sent a long note to Tony Blair saying it still isn't enough. If you want a first-class service, you need to pay a first-class fare. And the fact is, the French spend far more on healthcare than we do. The Germans spend far more on healthcare than we do, but they don't waste it. They've actually got more doctors per head of population than we do, and they've got more hospital beds per head of population than we do. In the case of hospital beds, more than twice as many. And so putting money in helps.
But you were sitting at the time on a Himalayan majority. The current government certainly isn't, and future governments, will always be conscious of wanting to stay on the right side of public opinion. Does there not need to be, Frank Dobson, a far bigger debate about realistically what the NHS can do? It was set up in a very different era to address very different needs.
Well, I don't think anybody sensibly is arguing about what it can do. It's what it can afford to do that we're arguing about, and the idea that in some way it will be cut back in certain areas is preposterous in my opinion. I know I'm regarded as old Labour, I regard myself in fact as heritage Labour, but by and large the people of this country like the NHS. It's the most popular institution in the country. And I believe if you said to them, look, it needs more money, it needs the sort of money that the French are putting in, it needs the sort of money that the Germans are putting into their systems, and I believe that people would be happy to support them. No, they wouldn't be happy, but I think they'd put their hands in their pockets and their handbags.
Heritage Labour is a late entry, I think, for a 2016 political phrase of the year, with just 6.5 hours to go. Maria Caulfield, what about that bigger question about the future of the NHS and what it can and cannot do in, I was going to say 2016, but 2017 and beyond? Perhaps both what you as a Conservative government and even what Norman Lamb is suggesting is mere tinkering.
Well, I mean, we know that demand is going up year on year in all sectors of the NHS by about 10%. So even if we stop and increase funding, it's still not going to be enough, because there's footfalls increasing by 10%, but there's new treatments coming through. There's diseases we can treat that we could never treat before, and people are living for longer. So we need to think about how we use that money as well. I mean, if you look at some of the projects that have spent billions of pounds in the NHS under the last Labour government, for example, £10 billion was spent on an IT project that was supposed to deliver electronic patient records, and was abandoned. PFI is still costing the NHS £2 billion every year. So it isn't just about how much you put in, it's what you do with that money to make it work the best for patients.
A quick sentence for mine. Frank Dobson.
The major waste at the moment in the NHS is the money that's been spent on contracting out. Before the internal market was introduced, the NHS used to spend 4 pence in the pound on running the system. It now spends 12 pence in the pound on running the system.
Last brief word,
and it's
Maria.
all going on lawyers and accountants.
Last brief word, Maria.
I mean, I think, people would be prepared to spend more money, but they want to make sure that that money is being well spent and it's not being wasted. And, as a nurse, I have seen over decades waste going on in the NHS that hasn't hit the front line, and people will pay more as long as they're guaranteed that that money will go to frontline services.
Maria Caulfield is a Conservative MP and a former nurse, and you heard from Frank Dobson as well, Labour's Health Secretary under Tony Blair. Thank you to you both.